Well, hello there, my kindred spirits. How are you doing this evening? I hope that every one of y'all are doing great. It is a cold, snowy evening here in North Carolina. We got a little sprinkling of snow flurries anyway, and just enough to kind of pepper the ground with a little bit of snow. I think there's a little bit more in the forecast this evening, so we'll see how it goes. But it's a good day to just settle in and cozy up by the fire and stay indoors tonight. Now, I thought I would read something to you. This is another diary entry from our mystery woman who allegedly lived down at our little farmhouse during the years 1937 through 1939. And I'll link a playlist to all the other Mayel diary entries that I've read this past year so that you can familiarize yourself if you don't already know about her. But this diary entry is titled Goblin's Gold, and don't let that title fool you because it's not a scary story at all. All right, so here we go. This is called Goblin's Gold, March 9th, 1937. Old Mrs. Birchfield and I spent Saturday out in the woods behind her house digging for roots. She makes a little extra money selling what she finds, and she told me her mother, who was part Creek Indian, taught her how to use ginseng to ease headaches and stop bleeding. She said an old Chinaman comes through every spring buying up all the ginseng she can spare. She always keeps a little bit back for her own family. We also dug sassafras root. My mother used to give me sassafras tea every spring, and drinking it again in Mrs. Birchfield's warm, dim kitchen took me right back home. We sweetened it with honey that Mr. Birchfield robbed from his hives last fall. He says spring's coming early this year. He saw a wild trillium blooming down by the Rocky River just last week. Sunday morning, we had a visiting preacher all the way from Floyd, Virginia. Mrs. Birchfield had warned me he was coming and that he had a weakness for her cooking. She said he makes a habit of stopping by Love's Grove in the spring and always asks for her carrot pie. I'd never heard of such a thing, but it was simple to make and mighty good. After washing off the day's dust, we got to work on Sunday dinner. Since Mr. Birchfield was off in Charlotte and he wouldn't be home till late, Mrs. Birchfield asked if I'd stay over and help her cook. She said I could sleep in the little room off the kitchen, the one with the feather bed, and that sounded just fine to me. We made Cornish pastries, fresh asparagus, cornbread, and of course, carrot pie. Mrs. Birchfield put me in charge of the pie. I boiled a pound of carrots till they were soft, ran them through the food grinder, then mixed them with light cream, eggs, maple sugar, walnuts, cinnamon, and nutmeg. I poured it all into a hot water crust and baked it till it set. It reminded me of my grandmother's sweet potato pie, only lighter and sweeter. After church, the preacher rode home with us. He asked if I wanted to sit up front in his brand new LaSalle touring sedan. It was awful fancy, too fancy for a Methodist preacher, if you ask me. I wasn't too sure about that preacher from Floyd. He seemed a little too bold for my liking. When Mr. Birchfield wasn't looking, he leaned in and whispered that I was a real looker. I didn't care much for that. While the men sat in the living room listening to the radio, Mrs. Birchfield and I warmed up the meal. It turned out delicious, and I was proud when every last bite of carrot pie got eaten. That preacher helped himself to 3 whole slices. Now, I usually take pride when somebody enjoys my cooking, but that man was fat and greasy, and he made my skin crawl. Then, when he was leaving, he went and hugged me a little too long. Then he had the nerve to squeeze my behind. I smacked him on instinct, and Mrs. Birchfield, not seeing what he did, showed me a disapproving look. But as soon as I told them what that greasy old man had done, both of them were horrified. Mr. Birchfield said that man wouldn't be preaching at our little church ever again. To shake off the bad feeling, Mrs. Birchfield and I took a walk down to Pumpkin Creek. Mr. Birchfield said he'd clean up the table, so we bundled up in our coats and headed out. Mrs. Birchfield led me through the brambles and bare branches until we came to a clearing. "Here's the secret place," she said, and oh, what a sight it was. Hundreds of bright yellow daffodils swaying in the breeze like little cups of sunshine. We picked armfuls of them. Their sweet scent filled the air. On the way back, we spotted a little cave where part of the creek disappeared into the rocks. When I peered inside, I saw something glowing deep within. I waved Mrs. Birchfield over, and she saw it too. Reaching in, she pulled out a mound of moss, then laughed. "That's goblin's gold," she said. "It's a kind of moss that glows in the dark." It wasn't real gold, but I liked it even better. This morning, I copied down a poem from the newspaper that reminded me of my brother when we were little. I'm going to send it to him tomorrow in a letter. And it's called "Out to Old Aunt Mary's" by James Whitcomb Riley. And it goes, "Wasn't it pleasant, oh brother of mine, in those days of lost sunshine, when the Saturday's chores were through and the Sunday's wood in the kitchen too, when we went visiting, me and you, out to old Aunt Mary's?" Until next time, diary, Mayelle. Now, isn't that a crazy story? It seems like there are always things like that that happen, and I'm glad that Mayelle got to walk down and see that goblin's gold. And have you ever seen anything like that? I am fascinated with phosphorescent lights, and there's something in the Smoky Mountains called foxfire that is a phosphorescent light as well. And then there's the Brown Mountain lights that are in North Carolina, and that's just so interesting to me, and supposedly that's phosphorescent light as well. So let me know if you've ever seen that with your own eyes, or if you know anything about it, because I think that that's so fascinating. Well, friends, thank you so much for listening to this short and sweet little video tonight. And if you're not familiar with James Whitcomb Riley, the author who wrote that poem, Out to Old Aunt Mary's, I encourage you to find some poetry by him. He is a wonderful poet and one of my very favorites. So I hope that you enjoyed that, and I can't wait to see you on your next video.